Welcome to Gangland Scotland EXPOSED, the Scottish Sun's new crime show. I'm Graham Mann, and this week we are talking about the greatest escalation in gangland violence seen in Scotland in decades, and whether it will ever end. So back in early 2025, we were suddenly made aware of an incident that happened in the Leith area of Edinburgh. And this was a serious attack on a beauty salon where a masked man had thrown a Molotov cocktail through the window of this property late at night on a Thursday. It was the 6th of March. The significance of this incident wouldn't become clear immediately, but over the course of the next few weeks, the significance of it was something more than we could really have imagined, and it was the start of an escalation in gangland violence that we haven't seen in Scotland for many years. This was a terrifying attack. It happened in Albert Street in Leith, and there are people who live above this property, so clearly it must have been a terrifying ordeal for them when they realised that the building was on fire. In the video, which was filmed by an accomplice, you can see the man almost mocking as he throws this Molotov cocktail through the window. Through our own research, we were obviously keen to figure out why this particular beauty salon was being targeted, and we found out that it was called Belle Chevaux, and that this was connected to a woman called Stephanie Dignan, who was the partner of a man called Mark Richardson. And Mark Richardson is a notorious criminal who is currently in the Scottish prison system, serving time for serious organised crime offences. So it was clear that it was associates of his that seemed to be the target of this attack. We were then to discover through sources that possibly the people behind it weren't actually in Scotland, or at least the people who'd ordered it were based out with our borders and may well have been based in Dubai. And again, more information started to come our way around the reasons for this attack, and one of those, it was allegations that other criminals had ripped off this Dubai-based gangster in a cocaine deal by using fake money to rip him off. And this was essentially a revenge campaign that he started with this attack on the salon in Edinburgh, which was the start of dozens more incidents which happened over the coming weeks and months. There were some very unusual elements of this case, none more so than the fact that the video of the crime had been circulating on WhatsApp groups, and it had obviously come our way, and it was clear that the man who was carrying out the attack knew that he was being filmed and that this was part of their strategy. It was almost a form of performance crime where they were using the video footage to boast about what they were doing and to mock their enemies and to make a more intimidating image for future attacks. But this was something that we hadn't really seen before, where there was quite clearly an obvious attempt to send this stuff to the media, and it was what was about to unfold. It became even more sinister. So over the course of the next few weeks, these videos continued to come our way in relation to other firebomb attacks, and they became a little bit more sophisticated each time. It was almost as if they were learning as they went along, and it became the norm for some of these videos to include music in the background. One, of course, that we noted was Johnny Cash, which was the Ring of Fire tune, which was played as another firebomb attack unfolded in these quite horrifying videos. It then became clear that a group who'd called themselves Tamil Junto were claiming responsibility for these videos. And as well as showing the crimes themselves, they also included text which made threats, explicit threats against associates of Mark Richardson. And it became much clearer to us that this was an orchestrated campaign, and we were obviously keen to find out who ultimately was calling the shots on this wave of violence. A name came our way of a man called Ross McGill, who was someone who had a public profile previously through his role as a leader within the Union Bears movement, which is obviously the ultras group that follow Glasgow Rangers. Ross McGill had previously been pictured alongside key figures at Rangers, including Stephen Gerrard, who was then manager, the captain, James Tavernier, and other Rangers players giving out awards during the time that he was a key figure at Ibrox. But at that time, it wasn't clear that he was involved in criminality in any way. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we looked carefully into who Ross McGill was. And after having carried out our due diligence and legal checks, we were comfortable and confident that we would be able to name and picture Ross McGill for the first time. And we felt a duty to do that because of the ongoing chaos that was unfolding in the streets of Scotland. And while that was happening, Police Scotland were also moving into action and had established what they called Operation Portalage, which was a crackdown on the chaos that had started in Edinburgh, but over the course of a short space of time had then ended up leading to lots of different attacks in Glasgow, where members of the notorious Daniel clan were also being targeted. We then discovered that in 2024, Ross McGill was due to appear in court in Scotland in relation to allegations of being involved in serious organised crime. We were able to establish that he never actually appeared in court, but had faced these serious allegations and had actually fled the country and was now based in Dubai. He had originally gone to Spain, but had then found his way out to the Gulf state, which, as we all know, is a popular location for other notorious criminals connected to Scottish gangland and other criminal networks around the globe. One of the reasons why these people end up in Dubai, because it's obviously a very different culture out there, and people who have money can obviously slip under the radar maybe in a way that they wouldn't if they were back here in Scotland. So Ross McGill and others have chosen Dubai because they're almost allowed to fly under the radar. But not only that, they get to enjoy the wealth that they've accrued through their criminal enterprises. There's also another factor is that there's much less likely to be any sort of revenge attacks or tit-for-tat attacks out in Dubai because they do not tolerate any kind of violence of that nature, whereas obviously, as we see in Scotland, it's almost a weekly occurrence that someone's car has been blown up or their house has been torched, whereas that sort of stuff just doesn't happen in Dubai. The wave of violence continued after having moved from Edinburgh to Glasgow, and really the escalation in violence was something that we had never seen before. It was almost every single weekend we were looking at a new attack. There were machete attacks, firebomb attacks, attempted murders. It was really, really becoming quite dark and very serious. But I don't think anyone could have imagined that things would escalate even further, leading to a double execution of two gangland figures that we haven't seen in Scotland for years. And this didn't unfold in the streets of Edinburgh or Glasgow. This happened out in Spain on May the 31st in a southern Spanish town called Fuengirola, where two notorious gangsters called Ross Monaghan and Eddie Lyons Jr. had been watching the Champions League final with a group of friends in a bar called Monaghan's Bar. After the game had finished, some people started to make their way home, but at around 11:30, an assassin appeared seemingly out of nowhere and approached Eddie Lyons as he sat on the terrace outside the Boozer and fired shots into his chest, killing him instantly. Nearby was Ross Monaghan, who clearly realised the danger that he was in and attempted to escape into the bar, perhaps seeking shelter in a toilet or behind the bar itself. The gunman pursued Ross Monaghan inside, and we're told that at one point the gun jammed, which gave Monaghan another opportunity to escape. But this cool-headed and calculated killer managed to keep his composure and release the weapon, and then turn his attention back to Monaghan, who by this time was at his mercy, and he then unleashed a series of shots into Monaghan, who died there and then at the scene. The killer then fled into the night. We understand he was assisted by a getaway driver. The information came our way. Within hours of the shooting, we were being told that these two men had been executed in cold blood, and it really was a jaw-dropping moment that even the most experienced reporters found it hard to take in. just the magnitude of it. What was also interesting about it was the information that initially came from the Scottish police was in conflict with what the Spanish police had concluded. The Scottish police had made it clear to us that they had no evidence to suggest that the murders in Spain were connected to the ongoing violence here. However, during a press conference in the days after the murders, the Spanish police made it clear that they thought the gunmen had ties to the Daniel clan in Glasgow, who, as we know, are the long-standing bitter enemies of the Lions gang. We later discovered that the suspected gunman had left Spain and made his way back to the UK, where he was subsequently arrested, and he was extradited back to Spain. His name was Michael Riley, and he is from Liverpool, and sources have told us that he has connections to criminality in Scotland and potentially connections to the Daniel clan. He's currently in a Spanish jail and is awaiting trial. So back on home soil, the violence continued. There seemed to be no let-up, and there was more firebomb attacks, shootings, machete attacks unfolding on the streets of Scotland. Police continue to investigate the wave of attacks that were happening here, and they have made dozens and dozens of arrests, and some have already gone through the courts and been convicted and sentenced to long periods of imprisonment. We learned a little bit more about the people who've been involved in these attacks. So the first foot soldier to be convicted was a man called Liam McDermott, who was caught looking for a Glock pistol using a metal detector in Edinburgh city centre. Then, shortly after that, a man called Aaron Reid was jailed for 8 years and 4 months for a terrifying attack in which he struck a man called David McMillan over the head with a machete outside his home. And David McMillan is an associate of Mark Richardson, which obviously was what we had been told from the beginning, that it was associates of Mark Richardson who were in the firing line. Another man called Nicky Robertson was jailed for firing shots at the home of a man called Paddy Beatson, who was another associate of Mark Richardson. We get back to Logan Carlin, who was jailed for the attack in the salon, which kicked off the wave of attacks which started in March the 6th last year. Since then, there have been 4 more individuals who have appeared at the High Court in Edinburgh for a wave of firebomb attacks. These are Kieran Abercrombie, Robert Thompson, Kenzie Gardner and Tyler Ramage. And we learned a little bit more about who these individuals are. It seems quite clear that some of these guys are way down the ladder in terms of the criminal hierarchy, and some would say that they have even been used by the people who are pulling the strings. But given that numbers of people who've been arrested, there are still dozens more who still must face justice. Most of them are in custody, but for the people at the very top, questions still remain over their involvement and also their whereabouts. Meanwhile, there have been more attacks between the rival groups to get one up on each other, so it doesn't look as though there's going to be any slowdown in the coming months.